The Washington Commanders got better on the field, and it turns out they also got much better off of it. And when you know it, the two things go hand in hand. That and more on today's episode of Locked On Commanders.
You are Locked On Commanders, your daily podcast on the Washington Commanders. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome inside, Commanders fans, to this episode of Locked On Commanders. I'm your host, David Harrison, here with you every Monday through Friday, your friend on the ground covering the Washington Commanders for Sports Illustrated's CommanderGameDay.com or locally for WUSA9.com, part of the local coverage team in Washington, D.C. I want to thank you for coming through today. On this episode, we are going to be catching up with Dan Quinn, head coach of the Washington Commanders here at the NFL Scouting Combine, going over some of the things that he had to share with us on Wednesday afternoon. And we're going to start it all off by talking about the NFLPA's third annual player report card for all the NFL teams, looking at how the Washington Commanders got better, also looking at one area where they actually got a little bit worse. Everydayers, I want to thank you for coming through every day. I already assume you're subscribed, but if you're not, and if anybody out there is not, please subscribe for free on YouTube or wherever you are listening to today's episode. If you're new to the show this offseason, I want to thank you for seeking us out, for finding us. Hopefully you like what you hear and you come back more often, and you come back every day even. This is your daily podcast covering the Washington Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. The Washington Commanders clearly in 2024 got better on the field. Turns out they also got much better off of the field. That according to the NFLPA's National Football League Player Association's team report cards, which came out for all 32 NFL teams, but specifically here, obviously, we're going to talk about the Washington Commanders. And to me, the most important grade that we're going to talk about, we're going to start off talking about, is the most important grade because it is the most important grade that Dan Quinn talked about when he was asked Wednesday at the podium during his press conference at the NFL Scouting Combine, and that was the treatment of families grade. The Washington Commanders in 2024 got a treatment of families grade of a B+. And for those of you not completely familiar with these team report cards, what happens is the NFLPA, the NFL Players Association, the union that represents NFL players, sends out these survey report cards to players, all NFL players that are registered with the NFLPA. And these players have the option, they don't have to necessarily, but most of them choose to fill out these report cards and give a grade on various topics. We'll go over all the topics here as we get through this. And give their team a grade based on how they experienced it, what they feel of the facilities, of the team, of the personnel, of the support staff, all of that stuff. So in the treatment of families category, the way that Washington Commanders families are treated by the organization, the Washington Commanders got a B+. Dan Quinn said, quote, "I was pleased to see treatment of families," and that goes to Josh Harris, the owner, managing partner, co-owner, honestly, and to general manager Adam Peters. There's no gap between what he says and what he does. And so to have that type of reflection in a year is really big. We told him how important this was to us. He heard that from the players and then took action on that. I think that's honestly what that relationship has been for us. What do you need to win, and how do we go about and do that? And so to see things like family support and having that increase, that's really big. Families, our families, players, coaches, the organization, they make a lot of sacrifices for us to do what we can do. And so to have that right there, team travel, all those to me just reflect back to Josh Harris and the vision of what it can be, and I couldn't be more proud to be a part of it, end quote. So clearly, the treatment of family, a very big deal. And this kind of goes back. I wrote an article for WUSA9 earlier this offseason based on Nick Allegretti, his decision to lead the Kansas City Chiefs after winning back-to-back Super Bowls, won 3 Super Bowl titles total with them. The opportunity to return to the Kansas City Chiefs was on the table, but he opted to leave for Washington for an opportunity to fight for a starting position, an opportunity to be a part of another organization that was trying to do things the right way and hopefully bring some winning to that organization. He talked about how instrumental his wife was in not only the decision, but in the ability for his family to move from Kansas City, Missouri, out to the DMV, establish a third home in their lives. They had 2 one-year-old twins at the time of the decision. All these things. So all these things play a role. And he really kind of talked about how much she was the backbone of their family, is the backbone of their family, I should say, really kind of holds them down, does all those things. So the treatment of those people, of those backbones, of those people that hold the household down while these players are doing everything that they're trying to do absolutely matters to them. And obviously, these players are very happy with the improvements that the Washington Commanders have made. Dan Quinn, Adam Peters, Josh Harris, all, specifically, but everybody really around the organization. Last year, in case you don't remember, F minus in 2024, treatment of families. So clearly, this thing has gotten a lot better in just 1 year's time. All those things. Now, other failing grades from 2024, the food/cafeteria got a D plus in 2024. Now that's a B plus. And look, Chef Connor, the head chef or the chef, executive chef, not sure exactly what the title is, but the top chef for the Washington Commanders. He also made lunch throughout the season on Thursday afternoons for the media. And the intention was for us to kind of literally get a taste of what the players are being fed and kind of how the food quality and all that stuff. And I got to tell you, look, I'm not a millionaire. I'm not an NFL player. That stuff was good. All right. That was some good eating, and not just because it was free. Just it was legitimately good. So food cafeteria getting a B plus. The facility, the lunchroom is not the greatest, but it's kind of a converted lunchroom. I'm sure that's something that's on Josh Harris's list of improvements to make over the years. Locker room was an F minus. Now it's an F. Look, the locker room is kind of is what it is right now. Again, that's something that Josh Harris has talked about as well. Something that certainly will probably be addressed over the next few years. I've heard a rumor, unsubstantiated, unconfirmed, so just make that clear. But I have heard a rumor that locker rooms are actually something that they're trying to renovate before the next season. So we'll see if that comes to fruition. Training room was an F minus. Now it's a C plus. Training staff was an F. Now it's a B plus. So there's massive improvements there. Team travel was an F. Now it is an A. And I don't know if this is exactly where it comes from, but I can tell you that, last year, like practice squad players wouldn't necessarily travel with the team, all those stuff. So I think that, that has a little bit to do with it. 2024 A's and B's. There were some A's and B's that the Commanders got last year on this survey. And where they are now, strength coaches were an A last year. They're an A this year. The owner was a B last year, and that was Josh Harris. And it was, his first, year, not even a full year as the owner of the team, got an A this year. So that's certainly reflective of that. Now, where they did go down was nutritionist, dietitian was a B minus last year, is a C plus this year. So did go down there. Last year, the head coach got a C. This year, Dan Quinn, an A plus. Not only did Dan Quinn get an A plus, he's one of 6 head coaches in the NFL to get an A plus. The others were Raheem Morris of the Atlanta Falcons, Dan Campbell, Detroit Lions, Andy Reid, Kansas City Chiefs, Mike McDaniels of the Miami Dolphins, Kevin O'Connell, coach of the year of the Minnesota Vikings. So really good company to be in there for Dan Quinn. 13 owners, including Josh Harris, got A's from their players on the survey. So Washington Commanders report card from the NFLPA, certainly looking up. Josh Harris's ownership group certainly have no plans to slow down their improvements that they're making across the organization. So I feel like these grades are only going to go up even more from there. So more on that as we go through the off seasons and see all the renovations that the Washington Commanders are making continuously. However, as we continue this episode, we did hear from Dan Quinn about more than just this report card on Wednesday. We will get into all of that coming up next on today's episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Wednesday was our day to talk to Dan Quinn, head coach of your Washington Commanders here in Indianapolis, Indiana at the NFL Scouting Combine. So we're going to run down a list of things that he said. We talked a lot. Look, we talked to Dan Quinn 3 times. We talked to him in his podium session, which is recorded and I'm sure is going to be broadcast over the week by NFL Network and all those things. I think the team streamed it as well, if I'm not mistaken. So you can hear that as well. We talked to him in a local scrum that was off to the side. So we talked to him there. And we also got to talk to him, Chick Hernandez of WSA 9, one-on-one with Dan Quinn. Obviously, I'm not in the interview, but standing by the interview, I write the article for WSA 9. That article, in fact, up on WSA9.com if you want to go read that. And really what we talked about with Dan Quinn primarily was kind of the theme of the week, identifying commanders in this year's NFL draft, knowing what a commander is now versus ideating what a commander was in 2024. So Adam Peters, Dan Quinn getting together year one of retooling the Washington Commanders, as they put it, really had an idea of what a Washington Commander was, what a Washington Commander was going to be, what they wanted a Washington Commander to be. But Dan Quinn kind of went in on Wednesday and talked about, now that they have a year under their belt, going through the season, going through games, going through the practices, doing all this stuff, now they know what a Washington Commander is, and then we know what a Washington Commander needs to be in order to be successful on this team. And that's really what they are after as far as, ideating or formulating a plan for not just the draft, but also free agency. They're not just going to go out there and get the biggest names on the market. They need to make sure they get the right names on the market as well. And Dan Quinn was asked specifically, what does a commander really mean? Like when you say you want to go out there and find a commander, in the NFL draft. What does that really mean? Dan said that it was more than one specific item. You couldn't just put your finger on this one thing and say this is exactly what a commander is, but it starts on the top of the pile, as he put it, above all else, competitive spirit. Guys who love ball and then are above all else willing to connect with their teammates. Be team first guys. When you're going through free agency lists, when you're going through draft targets, all this other stuff, if this isn't a guy that has that ultimate competitive spirit on the field, but also has the willingness and the ability to be a team player, right? We talk about some of these guys like Devontae Adams, wide receiver for the New York Jets, not a team player, very much a guy that at least the perception of him is, right? I don't know him, never covered him personally, all these things. So just the perception of him outside of his organization is he's a guy who would rather have 150 yards and 2 touchdowns in a loss than 0 catches, 0 yards, 0 touchdowns in a win, right? And that is not what a Washington Commander is. Terry McLaurin, on the other hand, certainly frustrated when he's not involved and the team loses, but when he's not involved and the team wins, he's okay being a decoy. He's okay being a guy that pulls attention elsewhere and opens up things for other guys. He's okay doing that. Probably wouldn't be okay doing it for 17 weeks, but it's not going to happen for 17 weeks, right? He's going to get his here and there as well. So that is what the Washington Commanders are looking for, is a guy who wants to go out there and compete, but a guy who also wants to go out there and be a good teammate. As Dan Quinn says, great teams are built of great teammates, so that's what you're looking for. Some of that is going to show up in meetings, Dan Quinn says, in some of these interviews that they're going to do during the week here in Indianapolis, but some of it comes up on the tape as well. So while I know today's NFL fan is smarter than ever, you guys have resources at your fingertips more than ever. So as you're watching the tape yourself, or if you're watching YouTube clips or whatever you're watching, look for that. Look for that competitive spirit. And if the guy that you're looking at doesn't have that competitive spirit, probably not going to be on the team. Was also asked about culture and environment, or talked about culture and environment, and specified, and I really enjoyed this, specified that culture and environment are not the same thing. A lot of times when we talk about culture, environment, and environment, we almost refer to them like they're synonyms, like they're the same thing, and they're absolutely not. Dan Quinn basically went in and said environment is just a place where hopefully you're happy to come to work. That is simply what that is. The culture, however, in Dan Quinn's words, quote, how we get down every day, end quote. And again, we've heard Dan Quinn say that before over the course of the year, but he kind of broke it down even further, right? It's the identity of the team. It's the behaviors. It's the habits. It all leads into the play style and the team's identity. That is the culture of the team, and it's important to manifest that culture, which they did in 2024. The players did it, and in his conversation with Chick Hernandez, Chick basically talked about him, inventing or bringing or developing this culture. And Dan said it wasn't me, it was them. The players created this culture. I got to be a part of it. And I think it's great. You hear, him getting an A+ from his players, and then he gives the credit back to his players for influencing him. It's just a big old circle of appreciation with each other. I call it a nice off. It's a nice off, and everybody's just stuck in this nice off, right? So how we get down every day, that's the culture, completely important. Second time around as a head coach for Dan Quinn, he said it was important to be a part of a team, but also, and then what he means by that, obviously, is a part of a team, right? Part of an organization. But what he meant specifically is having a general manager like Adam Peters, whose job it is to worry about the roster, worry about the salary cap, worry about all these things, and coordinators to shoulder the biggest load when it comes to game planning. Not that he's not involved in some way, shape, or form in game planning, but to have coordinators who that is their principal job, so that DQ himself can just focus on delivering the message, helping craft the culture, helping monitor that culture, making sure that everything is going the way that it needs to go. It's the way that I prefer my head coaches to operate. It's the way that, we've all kind of sat back here and we play if I won the lottery game, I think we've all sat back and said, well, if I was a coach, or if I was a GM, or if I was an owner, and when I sit back and say, well, if I was a coach, that's the kind of coach I would want to be. I'd want to be an executive, a guy who has my people doing what they need to do, the right people in the right places to be successful, allowing me to be flexible and say, okay, hey, I need to go over here today. I need to go over there tomorrow. Next week, I need to be in this third place, having the ability to do it because I'm not tied down to one avenue of the operation. Specifically, I asked Dan Quinn while he's up at the podium about where he draws the most value out of events like the 2025 NFL Scouting Combine. In his answer, he talked about learning the why for these players. And I'll be honest with you, I actually expected him to talk about the medicals. You know what I mean? That's really kind of the biggest part of this whole thing is the medical evaluations is NFL. It used to be that if you want to get medicals on a player, you'd have to bring him out for a visit and then have your doctors check him out. And these players are going through, 30, 25, whatever it is, medical evaluations and being poked and prodded and tested and stretched and bent and flexed and all this other stuff. Well, now they can all come to Indianapolis, Indiana for the Scouting Combine and a team of doctors will put them through all the tests and the rigmarole and all that stuff. And every team will get whatever report every team gets. So that's kind of like the main point of the NFL scouting combine, but the interviews are also a very big part of it. I know we will focus a lot on the drills and the exercises, but for a lot of us, this is going to be the first time or one of the few times that we see these players work out. Whereas these teams, they've got staffs of scouts who have already watched these guys a handful of times, if not more, and they're just looking to confirm some of these athleticism. So that's why it just kind of depends on who you are, what you're trying to get out of the NFL scouting combine. So Dan Quinn talked about learning their why, wanting to understand who the man is outside of just the player, outside the pads, when you get beyond the pads, and how important that is to the player and how that can fit into what the Washington Commanders are trying to do. He wants to find out what makes them resilient, right? Where does their brand of resiliency come from? Resiliency looks different on everybody, but he wants to find out what these players look like as resiliency, how they view themselves. He says that their scouting combine interviews for the Commanders are about 50-50 between background on the player and their story, and then they get to the tape. So it's about half tape in football, and the other half is about the human being, right? And getting to know the man. Also said he wants the players to feel relaxed in the environment, which I don't know that any player is going to feel relaxed in the NFL scouting combine environment. But, look, if that's the goal of Dan Quinn and his staff, to make these players feel as relaxed as possible, like they don't have to perform, right? It's an interview, yes, but it's not a performance. It's not a character that you're trying to play. We want to know who you are. Specifically, also likes to remember when a player talks about, like, say, the impact that their mother had on their lives or has on their lives, for example, so he can bring that back later if they're having a rough practice, if they're having a rough stretch or something, or even just to say, like, hey, how is your mother doing? I know she means a lot to you, stuff like that. So really just kind of make that human connection, right? And a little bit off topic, we talked to Assistant General Manager Lance Newmark as well this afternoon, on Wednesday afternoon. And I specifically asked him about the group visit. If you remember, the Washington Commanders had 30 players in at one time for a group visit. A lot was made of it. Some reports of Jane Daniels wasn't necessarily all that thrilled about it, all that kind of stuff. And I just asked him, I said, hey, looking back on that, almost a year ago now, what is the value that you take from that? And I asked him if they would be doing that again this year. He said right now he doesn't know if they're going to do it again this year, but he did say that the value he pulled from it, and it's his first time being a part of something like that, was really just seeing these players be around other players. And I think that's incredibly smart. I think it's incredibly important. And I honestly kind of hope they do it again, because when these players are in the meeting room with the team and it's all coaches, executives, coaches are on Zoom, you get locked in. I mean, we've all been at job interviews, right? You get locked into this mode of, I'm not fully me, I'm the me that I want you to see, right? But if I get around 29 other players and, we're having food and we're drinking non-alcoholic beverages, maybe alcoholic, I don't really know what the rules are for that kind of thing, to be quite honest with you. We're playing top golf, we're competing, we're talking trash. Now I'm going to get it's just kind of naturally going to happen, right? Now I think like the most locked in guys are still going to be a little bit on their toes. Like, okay, this is still an interview, this is still an evaluation period, right? But you're still going to be a little bit more yourself. So I think it's a really cool environment. So, just getting to know who these guys are as people on top of as players. So I think it's really cool to get some insight from Dan Quinn, also Lance Newmark later on in the afternoon about that. Of course, we also talked to him about some of the more football specific stuff, like what are you looking for in a pass rusher? Bobby Wagner, is he going to be back? All the kind of stuff. But we got some answers, some definitive, some not so definitive. We'll talk about all that coming up next on today's episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Wrapping up today's episode of Locked On Commanders, we did have a conversation with Dan Quinn about some more football-related stuff. But look, this is a people business, man, and we'll get to that here in just a little bit. But this is a people business, so the people business comes first. Coming to evaluating pass rushers, Dan Quinn was asked specifically, what is it you're looking for in a pass rusher? He said very quickly, quickness. A lot of quickly going on here. Quickness off the line, quickness to be able to beat somebody to the punch is what Dan Quinn talked about, but also the ability to adapt, right? If you can't go around someone, right, when offensive lineman, if you can't go around them, you got to be able to go through them. If you can't go through them, you got to be able to go under them. Can't go under them, got to be able to go around them, right, et cetera, et cetera. How does this guy not just get off the line quick, get to the point of attack quick, beat him to the punch quick, but also how do you counter when it doesn't work, right? Because it's not always going to work 100% of the time. Those are things you're looking at for pass rushers. So as you're out there evaluating pass rushers, Myles Garrett is obviously a really good one. Harold Landry, Tennessee Titans, we will talk about these guys who have been granted permission to seek trades later on here in the week, things like that. Those are the types of things that Washington Commanders are looking for. So those are the types of things you should be looking for. On whether or not the success from last year is going to motivate them to find guys in this year's draft that can step in right away, right? We saw them last year draft guys who were kind of known projects, right? Johnny Newton, even defensive tackle, was coming off of a foot injury. They didn't know about the second foot injury, but they knew he was coming off the first injury, that he might not be available for a little while. Ben Sinnott was brought in as a kind of a developmental guy, not going to be our number one, probably not going to be our number two, going to be our number three. I think they expected a little bit more involvement because they didn't expect as much from Zach Ertz. But anyway, I kind of knew that he was going to be a little bit of a developmental guy. Luke McCaffrey, very young as a receiver and relative experience, so they kind of knew he was going to be a little bit of a project there. So, it was asked, just like Adam Peters has been asked, just like everybody's been asked, how much does getting to the NFC Championship game, winning 12 regular season games, impact the type of players you're trying to go get? And Dan Quinn says it doesn't. He said that, they're not going to specifically say, like, can this guy contribute year one versus does he need time to grow? What they're looking for is the ceiling, essentially. Like, if this guy can make an impact for us 2 years down the road, and we think that impact is going to be great, and we really want that on the team, we're going to go get him, whether or not that's going to happen this year. So, it worked last year. We'll see if it works this year. Dan Quinn, interestingly, during his podium, brought up linebacker Bobby Wagner, made a comment about, I know a guy like Bobby Wagner is out there getting better today, right? Unprovoked, wasn't asked specifically about Bobby, so obviously it rose some eyebrows, and everybody's like, okay, you mentioned Bobby Wagner, who is a pending free agent expiring contract on your own. So Dan Quinn was asked in the local scrum, about the Bobby Wagner situation, was asked, do you expect Bobby Wagner to be back? Dan Quinn kind of jokingly, but also accurately said, you're going to talk to his agent. Bobby Wagner's agent, Bobby Wagner. So you're going to talk to Bobby Wagner's agent. But I will tell you that when Dan brought up Bobby Wagner in his podium, I felt, and I don't know if this is going to be noticeable on the television or noticeable on YouTube if you watch the interview, to just, the casual observer, but I think from being around DQ a lot in the last year, getting to know him, doing some interviews with him, just talking to him normally, things like that, I felt a little bit of a pause. And I think that pause is like, Bobby's not under contract for 2025. And I kind of felt a little bit of I'm going to say it anyway, Bobby Wagner. Now, that could just be, I really know this dude, I really like this dude, whether he's here or not, I respect the crap out of him, so I'm going to talk about him anyway. Or it could be, well, I know we're going to get something done, so I'll talk about him anyway. I'm hoping it's the second one, because I really want to see Bobby back here next year. On players like left tackle Brandon Coleman, Mikey Sainristil, look, I've had a lot of questions and people talking about, could Brandon Coleman move to guard? Could Mikey Sainristil move back inside? Or even one of them should, or both of them should do either of those two things. Dan Quinn said he wants to keep fresh eyes on them as far as where they're going to play in the future and not limit them because of their versatility. Now, he said he has a lot of faith in each of those guys in each of those positions. He wanted to make sure that was clear. This was not a, well, we'll wait and see because we don't know if we believe in them as a perimeter corner, as a left tackle, but more so just they're versatile. So we don't want to paint them into a corner right now and then have to kind of change that a little bit later. So he sees value in their ability to be moved. So for those of you who want to see Brandon Coleman move or want to see Mikey Sainristil move back inside, certainly Dan Quinn leaving the door open to that possibility. On the topic of free agency, said there's almost like 2 free agency periods, deciding what to do with the players that were on the roster last year and then finishing, figuring out who fits, who doesn't fit. And then, of course, the traditional free agency where you bring in new players to fill some of those spots. Mentions that he does expect a second-year jump out of certain players. Didn't say which players specifically. We did ask him for a follow-up on which players might fill bigger roles next year. I basically just said, multiple guys could fit bigger roles. But does say he does expect a second-year jump from some of these players. I'm assuming guys like Johnny Newton, certainly them. Luke McCaffrey is certainly probably one of them as well. Also talked about being in favor of technology. A lot of conversation about future penalties and plays being banned and all this other stuff happening here in Indianapolis. Dan Quinn did talk about the possibility of technology helping to make the game better and officiate it a little bit cleaner. Says over the past 20 years, he's seen a lot of progress, whether it's tablets on the sidelines, more cameras on the field or focus on the field for replay use, and that referees' jobs are so challenging as it is that any type of technology you can bring in to be efficient but also make the game a little bit better, he would be in favor of. Plus, he said technology is a tool that can help players learn better today, especially this generation who's so used to technology just being a part of your everyday life. Wouldn't be opposed to using technology to help spot and mark first downs, instead of saying chains, instead of having the chain gang, use technology, use cameras, use sensors, whatever you need to do, as long as it can be done efficiently, right? Didn't share an opinion on the tush push. I know a lot of people have opinions on the tush push. I do have a mailbag episode about the tush push that we will get to next week as we return to our regular schedule. We don't have a combine, we don't have a special event, so we'll get back to our more regular weekly schedule, including a mailbag episode on Wednesday. In our next episode of Locked On Commanders, however, I don't know if it's going to drop Thursday night or if it's going to drop Friday morning. I'm driving back from Indianapolis home on Thursday, so it's going to depend on how long that drive takes, how it feels when I get home. Obviously, I got a family waiting for me, so I got to do all those things. But either Thursday night or Friday, we will have an episode drop of Locked On Commanders. And on that episode, I do plan on diving a little bit deeper into this Jonathan Allen trade proposal, what some replacements could be, but also other players that have been granted permission to seek trades, like guys like Harold Landry, outside linebacker for the Tennessee Titans. Make sure you come back for that. In the meantime, if you got questions or comments, all you got to do is text me. To text me, all you got to do is go to joinsubtext.com/LockedOnCommanders. Become a Locked On Commanders Insider today. You can text me, and I'm going to text you. Hope that you have some enjoyment getting those text messages. Thank you for making Locked On Commanders your first listen of the day every day. For your second listen, check out the Locked On NFL Draft podcast with Damian Parson and Keith Sanchez. Now that the season is over, get the latest draft rankings, rumors, and news every day. Find Locked On NFL Draft on YouTube or wherever you're listening to this podcast. Everydayers, thank you for coming through every single day. And until we speak again, if you're out and about, please be safe, be kind, and I'll see you right back here next time for another episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.